Hello, very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's our privilege that you support us every Thursday to every Thursday. And today we are going to bring an extravaganza, a panel discussion on occupational lung disease. I am Dr. Atri Gangopadhyay from Ranchi, Jharkhand. I shall be the moderator of today's program. So basically, this is an introduction to occupational lung disease, which will be followed by a proper panel. We all know that any civilization requires dust. What dust? Minerals. All these beautiful buildings which we see, actually, this is from a very game I am fond of. But what I want to say is that the dust is responsible for all these buildings which led to civilization. But unfortunately, the dust can also bring disease because the dust, which is there everywhere, the dust can enter our breathing passages, our sinuses, our airways, our lungs, and cause disease. A brief attempt to classify. Inorganic dust can cause mechanical irritation, deposition over time. Organic dust, chemical reaction inside the body or immunogenicity. There can be thermal injury, there can be chemical injury, there can be radiation injury. The disease manifestations can be due to irritation, asthma-like symptoms or reactive airway dysfunction, hypersensitivity pneumonitis if it is organic, pneumoconiosis, emphysema overlap, toxicity or poisoning, and even cancer. A very big basket for one panel. So for today's discussion, we are not going to discuss about hypersensitivity pneumonitis or radiation sickness. We are going to stick to the occupational dust and its direct implications. So to introduce the panel for today, we have an environmental scientist from Bangalore, Dr. Pratima Singh. We have a community medicine specialist from Mangalore, Dr. Animesh Jain. From Ajmer, near the Thar Desert, we have famous pulmonologist, Dr. Neeraj Gupta. From the center of India, from Bhilai, Chhattisgarh, we have pulmonologist, Dr. Pratik Kaushik. From Hyderabad, we are very fortunate to have our CCI president today, Dr. M. Narendra, and a specialist in end-stage lung disease and lung transplantation. We have from Chennai, Dr. Saumitra Sinhari. So before we move to the panel, we shall have a short presentation by Dr. Pratima, who shall talk a little about the engineering or physical aspects of dust, which leads to this pneumoconiosis. So these are the panels for today's evening. And now the stage is over to Dr. Pratima. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Pratima Singh, scientist at CSTEP. I lead the air pollution domain. I thank the Chest Council of India for inviting me today to be part of this esteemed panel. I'll share my thoughts on the air pollution subject. So what is air pollution? Any change in the background concentration of the air we breathe. It could be due to presence of particulate matter, toxic gases, or chemicals. Pollution in one form or the other. It could be contaminated. It could be because of solid fuel or the gases. substance present in the atmosphere, which is injurious both to human health and the environment. We need to understand that not a single process around us is pollution free. It has been studied that 91% of the world's population live in places where air pollution does not follow the WHO. Now, what are the air pollution sources? The sources are usually classified as natural sources and anthropogenic sources. So natural sources are something that we do not have control over. That are volcanic eruptions, storm dust, forest fires. Anthropogenic sources are something that are man-made, that we contribute to. Those are industries, vehicular exhaust, thermal power plant, fossil fuel, and others. Now, air pollution is also classified as primary pollutant, secondary pollutant, and tertiary pollutant. So primary pollutants are basically emitted directly into the atmosphere from the source. They, as I mentioned, they could be from industries, from vehicular exhaust, from waste burning. And secondary pollutants are formed due to interaction of one or more pollutant in the atmosphere. So all the primary pollutants, when they go up in the atmosphere, they combine, and due to the chemistry in the atmosphere, secondary pollutants are created. The tertiary pollutants are formed due to waste burning, plastic burning, metallurgical industries. So it could be from any of the sources around us. It could be from paints and thinners. There are criteria pollutants that has been identified by Central Pollution Control Board in India, and particulate matter is one of the criteria pollutants. These are inhalable coarse particles and fine particles as well. We all know them as PM 2.5 and PM 10. Now, just to help you all understand the size of the PM particle here in the image, you can see that the cross section of the hair, this size, is even smaller than a fine beach sand. And if you look further here, the PM10 particle is even smaller than the hair strand. And within one PM10 particles, there are numerous PM2.5 particles that exist. So particulate matter of aerodynamic size less than 10 micrometers are not visible by naked eye. These particles, they are extremely small. They could be found in liquid droplets also, and they are easily transported through our respiratory system to our lungs and also to our blood. These particulate matter and other pollutants are found in various outdoor activities, indoor activities. Some of the sources I've just mentioned here: household emission, power plants, forest fires, diesel vehicles, cars and trucks, exhaust emissions, non-road vehicles, especially they are operated by diesel, and they create a lot of dust resuspension as well, and industrial sources. I would just want to give you an example that we all think that indoor air pollution, there's no indoor air pollution. It's always safe inside the doors. But I've lived in Delhi for almost a decade, and it was in the year 2016, October, November month, when the winters came in early, and we all were happy with the foggy weather. But almost after a day or two, we could smell the fog. It was burnt. And then we realized that it was not fog, but it was smog. And we had to stay indoors for almost a week, considering that indoor air pollution is safe. But because we don't have much understanding, we don't know that how much indoor air pollution also contributes and impacts to our atmosphere. So there are various pollutants like carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, chloroform, formaldehyde, synthetic polymers, pesticides, all contributed from the various activities within indoor. So these are very simple activities that we need to notice around us and to ensure that we try to remove them from our daily life. Now, I would want to highlight on few of the occupational hazards that are caused due to air pollution, and talking about them, industrial sector is the major contributor when it comes to occupational hazard. Industries like coal mining, coal-fired boilers and cement industries, steel manufacturing units, thermal power plants, paint and furniture, agricultural burning, brick kilns, they all contribute hugely to the ambient air pollution, and they also impact the human health. Just imagine yourself lighting an agarbatti or doing puja and carrying out havan by burning wood in your house. You will get watery eyes, itchy eyes, you will cough. And on the other hand, imagine a worker working in a coal mine or a highly polluted industrial area and breathing the same, even more toxic air. I don't know for how many long years. And I'm sure the health impact that these communities would be experiencing is something that we can't even imagine. There are various pollutants that are emitted from such industries like arsenic, sulfur, cadmium, copper, nickel, volatile organic carbons, bioaerosols. These are all harmful to our human health, and in long run, they cause nervous system damage, they cause respiratory disease, they cause asthma and cancer and whatnot. The list is endless. And we are still researching and trying to understand the deeper impact of these air pollutants on human health. Transportation is yet another sector which contributes hugely to the ambient air. And beside exhaust emissions that are emitted by the vehicles, there are non-exhaust emissions also, which contribute significantly to the PM 2.5 load. Now, these non-exhaust emissions could be from wear and tear of your brakes, from the engine. There's road resuspension also. So we need to ensure that our vehicles are in proper condition. We carry out proper PUC check of our vehicles. Do not use diesel fuel. Just try to imagine what would be the condition of a street side vendor who is selling fruits or eatables or something, who has to breathe these vehicular exhaust like for 15-18 hours in a day. Not only the street side vendors, not only the pedestrians who are walking across the street, but also the passengers who are sitting in an auto rickshaw or a car with their windows down also inhale the same polluted air every day. It's just that we don't have an understanding how much polluted air we are breathing in. We do not pay any attention to this. There are very harmful pollutants like barium, chromium, copper, elemental carbon, iron, nickel, aluminum that are part of such polluted air from the vehicles, which impact our health. It impacts the environment. And imagine if there are women selling something on the street, they have kids with them, they are also impacted in a similar fashion. So as I mentioned that indoors is not safe. People usually spend around 80% of their time indoors, which means more exposure to polluted air, especially for women, children, and elderly. as they stay almost the entire day indoors. Now, not in the cities, but try to imagine in rural areas or slums where people use solid fuel like wood, coal, dung cakes for their cooking and heating purposes on daily basis. Just try to imagine the three meals that they cook in the kitchen, the amount of smoke they are inhaling, and all that smoke that's going and depositing in their lungs and impacting their respiratory system and causing problems such as tuberculosis and other issues. The problem is that not only the women, but also if she is pregnant and the child she is carrying, the fetus also gets impacted due to this polluted air, especially the problems such as malnutrition, kids, stunted growth. All these challenges that we have been observing in the recent years are because of air pollution. So this is yet another sector where we need a lot of interventions. We need to create awareness among the citizens group to ensure that they shift from dirty fuel to a cleaner fuel. Just to make you understand that PM10 particles, they penetrate till our trachea, to respiratory system. PM2.5 even goes deeper, it goes to our lungs. And if we talk about PM1, it's ultra-fine particles, they just go and dissolve in our blood, and that is when it causes Alzheimer's and cancer and heart attacks. So we should not be taking air pollution lightly from the various sources around us: industries, waste burning, domestic cooking, transportation. Another very good example, if you can see the picture here on the right, is firecracker burning. So during Diwali, I myself have experienced that, especially on the Diwali day around midnight, it becomes difficult to breathe because of all the pollution that has been created by firecrackers. But the problem is that we humans don't listen, even though the government has initiated ban on the crackers, but we don't understand how it impacts our health, especially the elderly, especially the kids are harmed and impacted a lot. So to conclude, talking about the occupational health due to air pollution, the major sources are industries, especially the cement and the steel manufacturing, coal mining, smelting, metallurgical, agricultural burning. We have been hearing cases of, agricultural burning across the northern region, the IGP in Indo-Gangetic Plain in India, and how that pollution travels from one place to other and impacts the environment. So imagine about the communities who stay near such activities, who stay near such industrial clusters, especially the small and medium enterprises, and how on a daily basis they are impacted due to the stack emissions, due to burning of coal, due to waste burning, and especially the transportation. I have seen in one of the hospitals here in Bangalore that especially the drivers, they were monitored over a period of 6 months. Those who drive heavy commercial vehicles, they had developed the issues, respiratory issues, they have developed asthma, and few of them also developed cancer. And these people I'm talking who are non-smokers. And in recent times, we have started talking about air pollution inequality. This is among the various strata of the society, among the various age groups, among women and men. But due to COVID conditions, we have seen that men are also impacted due to indoor air pollution, and they are impacted more because they have occupational impact also from the outdoors and the domestic indoor impact as well. So we need to create awareness, and what better than this platform where everyone is a doctor who understands the problem, who can communicate these to the patients that come and visit them, and create an awareness for the betterment of their own health and for a good quality life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pratima. Yeah, our panel discussion today is on occupational lung disease, but a very important food for thought you provoke to us that occupational lung disease and air pollution are very much interrelated, and to beat one, maybe we shall have to beat both of them. Very well illustrated. So to move on to our panel, my first question goes to Dr. Animesh Jain. We all remember a few years ago, a very famous YouTube video was released, the Manipal song, where they had shown that Manipal, beautiful beach on the tune of Summer of 69. And Dr. Animesh is very cross with us because he loved to take a walk on that beach every evening. And today we had to deny him that opportunity. So Dr. Animesh, please tell us a little about the prominent occupational lung diseases in various parts of India.
So thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on this platform. Thanks to Chest Council of India and the office bearers. And thank you, Dr. Atri, for that question. I hope I'm audible. Could you please confirm?
Great. Audible.
Yes. Okay, right. So yes, there are quite a few of those occupational lung diseases. Now, the thing is, since you are asking me prominent, see, in our country, to what and from the kind of experience as well as from what the literature review and what we have been doing even in our own specialty, what we see is that silicosis is one of the things which is quite prevalent. It's there in many parts of India, including Bihar, Jharkhand, UP, say West Bengal, Orissa, that belt, and then also in the central, that is Chhattisgarh, and towards the western side in Gujarat and even Rajasthan and even Pondicherry. So these are some of the places where, because this is from the silica mining industry, that's where it comes from. And the impact it creates is like, it is of course a disease, but the problem is, and especially since you are from all these, the specialty mainly consists of respiratory medicine, you would understand that silicotuberculosis is another thing which actually creates a lot of issues. So that is another challenge, and that's why I brought up silicosis first. But then there is another one, which is asbestosis. That is from the asbestos industry, where there is asbestos mines and asbestos dust. And that is again seen in Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal, even in Andhra Pradesh, Rajasthan, and also from where I am from, that is Karnataka. So all this is also seen there. Then we also have something known as a coal workers pneumoconiosis, or to be very specific, again, anthracosis, where we have, this coal dust which is there, and again, different types of. So this is again seen in the areas where the coal mining is prominently and predominantly done. There are many places in India, but there are some which take a major share, and that happens to be Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Orissa, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and to an extent even in Tamil Nadu. Of course, there are other states also, but these are and again, probably in that order, if I can say, majorly in, say, Bihar, Jharkhand, even to say West Bengal, the Jharia coal mines, and Orissa. So all these places we have this. And there is also something known as bagasosis, which has been a challenge because India produces a large amount of sugarcane, and the sugarcane waste, that is the fibrous, that that part which comes out, that leads to a hypersensitivity pneumonitis. So that's again seen in many parts, but then prominently in those areas where we have a lot of sugarcane production. So I think India is probably the second largest, if I remember correctly, producer of sugarcane. And this goes into another industry and many other industries, including the cardboard industries. And way back in 1955 in Kolkata, it was actually found that this bagasse was one of the problems. So bagasosis was found out in India, and now we see it's there in UP, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, including in the state I come from, that is Karnataka, as well as in some parts of Gujarat as well. So these are some of the ones. Bicynosis is there again in Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, to an extent in Chhattisgarh. That is again from flax or the hemp or the cotton fiber industry, and that's where that those fibers are inhaled and they go and then they produce a kind of a interstitial lung disease. And another thing which again is widespread, because India is predominantly an agricultural country, so we also see to an extent that farmer's lung, which is mainly due to this. Basically what happens is there is a hay and dust which gets further a particular kind of a kind of you can say a fungus which is there. So that leads to this farmer's lung, and then again that's again one of the issues. So these are the prominent ones which are seen in India as such. Of course there are many more if you go into, but these are the prominent ones which are seen in different parts of India.
Thank you, Animesh ji. And now my next question to Dr. Pratima Singh. Dr. Pratima grew up in Gujarat, and when she was training at Delhi, she actually worked with Nobel laureates and Nobel nominated scientists. So Dr. Pratima, please tell us about the various occupations which are linked to common occupational lung disease.
Thank you, Dr. Atri, and I would thank Dr. Animesh, who has already, talked about the various diseases like silicosis and asbestosis and black lung disease. So basically, the occupational hazards are mostly found at the places that we work. So these are basically the mining regions, the ceramic, pottery, cement industries, steel industries, especially the construction and demolition activities where they are taken. CPCB does have rules and regulation in place to ensure that the construction and dust are contained at the places where construction activity is happening, and also the vehicles that carry construction materials, they need to be covered with tarp material. But the problem is that these regulations are not implemented properly on ground, and that is why there's a lot of resuspended dust in these areas, which result to silicosis, and especially the ash from the cement industry and glass industry. All these things are a major challenge. Another thing that Dr. Animesh also highlighted was the asbestosis. So they are usually the sources, the ceiling materials that we have in the houses, the indoor construction activities, everything. The problem is that these are quite severe problems. They create severe problems, and they are irreversible, and they cause a lot of hypertension and cardiac problems. But it's not that they cannot be prevented. They can be prevented, and especially the industries, they need to take proper safety precautions, and they need to have stringent policies in place within house, and they need to do proper timely audit intervals to ensure that the workers and the other people within the officials within the premises are following such norms. Now we have spoken about dust a lot, so we can see dust everywhere. Being in India, we can see it around, when we are sweeping in our houses also, we can see dust particles on the roads, because there's a lot of dust particles that have been accumulated. The slurry, during rain, we can see that all gets washed out, but the sides of the road, they are always filled with the slurry particles, and when they dry up, they resuspend in the atmosphere. So here it is not an occupational hazard, but something that every municipal body in a city needs to ensure that the road infrastructure is proper, our vehicular movement is proper, and there are no bottlenecks created. So then only in that condition, we will be able to reduce the resuspended dust that happens in the atmosphere. Also, especially in the coal mining areas, where there's a lot of movement of the heavy commercial vehicles in and out from the coal mining areas. So they also carry a lot of dust particles, these coal particles along with them towards the city area, which impacts human health a lot. Apart from that, very interesting thing is that bricklins. So recently, a lot of emphasis was focused on the bricklins. They were regulation that came in that they were asked to shift to cleaner tech, not a cleaner technology, but a better technology called zigzag technology. And they were asked to shift outside the city premises because they use dirty fuel and the stack emissions, they flow from one area to other area, impacting humans a lot. So that is one classic case of, dust and coal and smoke and everything. Another example that I would want to take here is agriculture. Agriculture is a sector that India, prominently depends on, and but somehow we need to have proper and efficient technology to ensure that whatever bioaerosols or emissions are happening from the fertilizer that we use, or the cattle rearing that is happening, or the stubble burning that we carry out in the northern India, we need to have some regulations and some incentives for the farmers and training awareness as well to ensure that
Okay.
whatever
Thank you,
emissions
Dr.
are coming.
Pratima. This is part of another question. I will again come back to that. So
Sure.
I would want to thank Dr. Madhuri M. Devsikdar from Goa, who put these two questions. This was the first question of the day. And now we shall move on to Dr. Neeraj Gupta. I have never been to Dr. Neeraj's workplace, but there are these pharma company people who visit Dr. Neeraj one day and the next week they come to Ranchi to visit me. They tell me that Dr. Neeraj chamber has the vision of the holiest place in the world. You can look at Pushkar, you can look at Mount Abu, you can look at Ajmer Sharif, all from one window. So Neeraj sir, please tell us about the clinical features of allergic manifestations due to occupational lung disease and reactive airway dysfunction syndrome. The allergic manifestation clinical features, sir.
Sir, you need to unmute, sir.
So thank you, Dr. Atri, and thank you, CCI, for invitation to this platform. This is an important area of discussion, that is occupational lung disease, and that too, the reactive airway disease syndrome and asthma-like symptoms because of exposure to various occupations. Now, as far as clinical features and symptoms are concerned, we know that asthma is characterized by a triad of cough, wheeze, and breathlessness. The reactivity to occupational sensitizers or irritants is no different. The symptoms are same here, but we know that there is a definite history of exposure at workplace to different irritants and different sensitizers, which may lead to these symptoms. Now, there is difference between sensitizers and irritants, that an individual who is working in an environment where he is sensitive to certain proteins or certain allergens or certain occupational environmental pollutants, he will develop sensitivity to these environmental pollutants in a duration of time. So there will be a latency of period between the onset of exposure and the onset of symptoms. So the mechanism is immunological in this sense, and the sensitization will lead to onset of these symptoms of cough, breathlessness, and wheeze. While when the patient is exposed, when the individual is exposed to an irritant, a high dose of irritant, he will develop reactive airway disease syndrome. So the basic difference is low dose exposure and the high dose exposure. The symptoms are same. When there is high dose exposure to irritants, the individual develops cough, breathlessness, and wheezes right on the day of exposure because the dose of exposure is heavy. Number one. Number two, we need to know two different terms, that is the asthma exacerbated work exacerbated asthma and work related asthma. Work exacerbated asthma are those individuals who are already suffering from atopic disorders or bronchial asthma, and their symptoms they get aggravated when they go to the workplace. While work-related asthma is the onset of asthma in adults who have never had history of atopy or never had asthma in past, but they have developed sensitization to the workplace environment and have developed symptoms like asthma. So this is basically the work-related asthma. The irritants or the sensitizers which are there at workplaces can be classified as high molecular weight or low molecular weight. The high molecular weight are basically the animal proteins or the plant proteins or the seeds, enzymes or the vegetable gums. And the low molecular weight are usually the metal or the wood dusts or even the chemicals, insecticides or the drugs. So this is how we can explain the asthmatic symptoms at related to work environment.
Thank you, Neeraj sir. We shall again come back to you. Now we shall move on to Dr. Pratik Kaushik. Dr. Pratik Kaushik loves the environment, loves the natural scenery so much that his way of distressing is to drive 500 to 600 kilometers at a stretch to relax. So, Dr. Pratik, we have this question from Bhavani Shankar Das from Howrah. Please tell us about the clinical features of coal workers' pneumoconiosis.
So pneumonic, am I audible?
Yeah.
So pneumoconiosis, by definition, is a non-neoplastic reaction of lung to any inhaled mineral dust or organic dust. With coal workers pneumoconiosis, it is the exposure to the coal. As Dr. Animesh had pointed out one term, anthracosis. So coal, depending upon their types and the carbon content, it is divided into a high quality coal of which is anthracite and slightly low quality coal, bitumen or semi-bitumen coal. Now, clinical features of coal workers pneumoconiosis will depend upon whether the person it will depend upon the severity of the disease or exposure. One, intensity during exposure. Second, his individual susceptibility to develop inflammatory reaction. And the third is, and the most important would be the nature of the dust which is being inhaled. Coal worker pneumoconiosis clinically can be differentiated into simple coal worker pneumoconiosis, where the nodule size is on the lower side, and radiologically lesions with clinical symptoms. Simple coal workers pneumoconiosis, the initial presentation would be just an incidental finding on the X-ray. You will not have too much of ventilatory mismatch. You won't have too much of decrease in FEV1 or volume capacities, and it is more of an incidental diagnosis along with a strong history of exposure to other occupational exposure. With the if it is superimposed with some other infection, then the symptoms of shortness of breath, cough can be there. Usually, chronic bronchitis can be seen in early exposures, that is 3 to 4 years of occupation. But when you take into the criteria, a mean age of 10 years of exposure has to be taken into consideration if we are classifying it as pure occupational lung disease. Then, as the disease progresses, and it will have the features of advanced COPD, which will have features of like cor pulmonale, breathlessness even on exertion, mild exertion, to sometimes dyspnea at rest. Very rarely I have yet to see a patient who is coming to me with dyspnea which has not been relieved by rest. So mostly the patients who are coming with chronic bronchitis and early COPD, they are the ones who will have an incidental finding of nodules in their X-rays, or if I go for if I get a CT done there, I would find if there is a occupational exposure history. That is the more of the clinical presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pratik. Now we move on to our beloved Dr. Narendra sir. And I remember an incident once Dr. Narendra sir told that he had a hand and wrist injury because at that time he was the professor at one of the largest medical colleges in India, Osmania University, and he was made to sign 20 plus thesis and 50 plus logbook inside 1 hour. So Narendra sir, please tell us about the investigations from blood and sputum and chest X-ray finding in a case of pneumoconiosis.
Thank you, Atri, for your nice remembering power and smart introduction. We'll move to the blood investigations in pneumoconiosis. It is very well known that various cytokines and growth factors secreted from the monocytes and macrophages play a key role in the diagnosis of pneumoconiosis. What are they? The most important ones are alpha tumor necrosing factor, interleukin 8, and platelet-derived growth factor AA, which are the most sensitive biomarker for the diagnosis and pathogenesis of pneumoconiosis. They are secreted from the monocytes when the prerequisite for these biomarkers are with the coal dust quantification of 5 milligrams per ml. In the monocytes, if you identify these markers, which says that it is a more pathognomic of pneumoconiosis. What are there in urinary biomarkers? They are the mostly related to the asbestosis. They are the SMRP, that is soluble mesothelin related peptide, and chorioembryonic antigen CEA, and these SMRP, which indicates the exposure to the asbestosis. When SMRP in combination with the CEA, which tells that there are the Humpty Dumpty of asbestosis related diseases. And next comes is the fibulin 3, which is a diagnostic marker for the specific mesothelioma. Next is urinary 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine, which is abbreviated as 8-OHDG, has been used to measure the oxidative stress caused by the asbestosis and FOS. There are so many markers from the sputum, taking from cytokines, growth factors, thrombosis regulatory molecules, proteases and antiproteases, acute phase proteins, and structural lung components. These from the novel molecules from the sputum are microRNA, microparticulates, and progenitor cells, which indicates the prediction of the pneumoconiosis. When it comes to the radiological presentation, each subgroup has a typical presentation. If you take a simple pneumoconiosis, they present with a upper lobe predominant small nodular shadows. If you take a complex type of pneumoconiosis, they present with a diffuse fibrotic strand-like diseases. When it goes to progressive pulmonary fibrosis, we have a diffuse lung changes. Each disease has a specific presentation. When you go back to the mesothelioma, the pathognomic is diaphragmatic and costal pleural thickenings. And
Narendra sir, just to sum up, in current clinical practice, which of these tests would be specific or useful in such cases of pneumoconiosis, sir?
Most specific are sputum microRNA, microparticulates, and urinary SMRP and CA in combination are most useful for the pneumoconiosis.
Thank you, Narendra sir. Now we move on to Dr. Soumitra Sinha Roy. And when Dr. Soumitra Sinha Roy was doing his lung transplant fellowship at Toronto, his mentor over there wanted him to stay over there. And Dr. Soumitra told that it's very cold over here and I would be very uncomfortable in staying at such a cold place. So he chose to relocate to Chennai. So Dr. Soumitra, in end-stage lung disease, you look at a lot of CTs. So please tell us about the CT imaging in pneumoconiosis.
Thank you very much, Atri, to make it really enjoyable in the way you are handling. And thanks a lot to CCI and the office bearers. This is the first time I'm coming to this platform to talk to you people. I have to show some cities. I thought maybe we can only chat, but without showing some city, I would not be doing justice to this. So just let me show quickly, share it. I think the slides is visible.
Yeah, your screen is visible.
Yeah, I will try to go through this very quickly. This is a simple silicosis. You can see in the X-ray that the lower parts are mostly not affected, and there will be mostly big nodules, mostly in silicosis, and they are very well defined. Whereas the righter one, the one in on the right side, is from the Coloworkers pneumoconiosis. They are not very well defined. That's the only basic difference between those nodules in silicosis and Coloworkers pneumoconiosis. Though the two diseases are completely different, they are different pathogenesis, etc. But their CT and X-ray finding will be almost the same, except those 5 minor things which you have to pick it out. That's why I put those two cities side by side so that it can be picked out. And also you can see in the silicosis there will be the peripheral nodular changes. Those nodules are actually peripherally situated, just almost opposing the pleura, and this is sometimes called pseudoplaques, but this can be seen. And this the CWP I have talked to you about. Now this is a complicated Coloworkers pneumonia, and in this you can see around a 57-year-old man, a conglomerate of small nodules, and you all know about the progressive massive fibrosis, the difference between PQR, STU, and ABC. As per this city, you know, if it is less than 1 centimeter conglomerate, then they will be not progressive massive fibrosis. More than 1 centimeter, they will be progressive massive fibrosis. And that also ABC, if only single one, then it is and it is less than 5 centimeter. A between 1 to 5, B more than 5, or multiple apical areas, then it will be C. As you can see, in both these diseases, both Coloworkers and in silicosis, the nodules are preferred as per the your lymph distribution. Wherever the lymph distribution is higher, there it is more. So they are mostly is seen in posteriorly. As you can see in the city, they are more posteriorly and in the upper region. This is as per the lymphatic distribution. And also, as our arch is towards the left, so it is supposed to be more on the left, but that very minute difference most of the time we don't see. And also in this city, you can see the emphysematous changes at the periphery, the emphysematous bulla, cicatricial emphysema. And you can see on the very right where the arrow mark is there, there is an ICD has been inserted because of definitely a pneumothorax. So this is a complicated Coloworkers pneumonia with CT features. Progressive massive fibrosis in a silicosis with, you can see in the mediastinal view, the calcified nodules. And in this, in the lung view, you can see the parenchymal view. Again, the cicatrization changes, the conglomerate in one area or 2-3 different areas. And as I said, the left is slightly more preponderant. There is a big, large nodule with a central cavitation, which is possibly due to ischemic necrosis, but it could be associated with TB. As you all know, that silicosis can be associated with TB. And also there can be connective tissue disorder association. Those are the other issues which can be associated. It can be associated with chronic bronchitis because of progressive emphysematous and chronic bronchitis changes. So this is PMF. And then the acute silicosis. This is a quarry worker, and it will be just like a crazy paving appearance with predominantly in the lower lung field here, and there will be ground glassing and crazy paving appearance will be there, just like alveolar proteinosis. This I wanted to just show as a Wilder's pneumoconiosis. This patient was actually we handled. This is a patient who is a worker in the welding area in a car manufacturing unit, and this is actually a non-smoker with 15 years of employment there. And this shows numerous small nodules, centrilobular nodules, and there will be some few branching patterns. You can see at the bases somewhere a few small branching patterns. This person and those nodules are somewhat ill-defined, not as defined as silicosis kind of thing. And these nodules will not go away. As you know that in a case of HP, the nodules and the parenchymal changes will go away. Even after 1 year, the nodules will remain so. Benign asbestos disease, we all know, but just thought I will show a few pictures. Pleural plaques, diffuse pleural thickening, rounded atelectasis, as you can see in the lower base here, there will be some rounded atelectasis, and the classical description of basal and diaphragmatic calcification, as you can see in all the CT scans are there. Even there is the right and left side, the horizontal features are also having calcifications. There will be some small fibrotic changes here and there, but mostly the benign asbestosis is related to pleural diseases. The next is the actual asbestosis. Asbestosis is related to pulmonary parenchymal changes. As you can see, there are multiple, just like UIP kind of changes with the honeycombing fibrosis, interstitial fibrosis are seen mostly, and there are a few calcified changes. You can see here on the diaphragm, calcified diaphragm, which gives you an idea. It is always better to take the CT in a prone position, which will make your problems to be seen very quickly and easily. And there is a left-sided diaphragmatic hernia is there. That's a small, insignificant finding, but an incidental one. The last one is the malignant mesothelioma. Here you will see the pleura will be extremely thickened, nodular, and the most important thing is the mediastinal pleural thickening and nodularity is very important. More than 5 millimeter thickness is important, and there is also associated calcification. There will be a nodule. You can see here a pleural-based nodule, which is invading the rib here and going out slightly outside, and it's coming out of the chest wall here outside the bony cage, and so that's malignant mesothelioma. The prognosis is extremely poor. Most of the cases, the average lifespan is 1 year after diagnosis. And in this CT, the central one, if you can see that it has extended into the abdominal area also. So this is malignant mesothelioma. I just wanted to show if there was a discussion on byssinosis and bagasosis, more seen as very rightly pointed out. I'm from Calcutta, so we first very young ages we have seen a few. This is an organic dust toxic syndrome. The difference between this and the other things which I have just now shown is this will go away as soon as you take the patient out. Maybe a year or two later, the lung will be perfectly all right. So Monday fever and dyspnea while working in a cotton factory over 7 year of period, chest x-ray and CT scan shows diffuse numerous ill-defined small nodule and ground glass attenuation in few areas, very minute nodules these are, and after about the second city, as you can see, just adjoining on the right hand side, is after about 2-3 weeks later, where you can see the nodules and the lung involvement is getting better, and after a year, this patient lung CT scan was completely normal. I think that is it. I'm sorry if I have taken a lot of time.
Thank you, Dr. Soumitra, for those beautiful pictures. Every picture told a story. And another thing which we all appreciated was your pictures on the right, which actually told us that after a period of time, if the exposure is removed, the CTs actually become better.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I did not have that 1 year post CT. That was completely normal.
Wonderful. Admin, could you please end the screen share?
Yeah, sorry, I will do that.
Great. Now, one big reason why I did not pick up community medicine was I was very scared about demographics of the disease. So Animesh ji, could you please tell us about any special demographic features observed in pneumoconiosis with respect to age, gender, etc.?
Thank you, Dr. Atri. You're making it quite interesting, but I'm sure that you don't have to worry about demographics, because I'm sure you all are coming across these things. Only thing is that the nomenclature probably. Anyway, lighter side apart. So what I think some of the panelists have actually brought up this, and even Dr. Soumitra was saying that 7 years, 10 years. So one of the things is usually it is seen in middle and older age. But there have been reports, and there have been reports in various other parts of the world also about younger people recently also getting it. Now, there are reports from China, there are reports from other parts of Asia and other places. I have not come across except for 1 or 2 papers where India, it says younger people, but middle and older age, and majority are males. Now again, it's not related to male gender or something, but it is because those are the people who are more into these kind of occupations, like basically where it is say something like mining, or where there is something like silica or asbestos dust is involved. So it's not that the women don't get it. They also, and if they are exposed to this, they get it, but majority are again males. And one of the things which is seen is that if they are already smokers or having a pre-existing lung disease, any kind of, maybe it's asthma or a chronic lung disease, or even to that extent that they have some TB, so then again there is a more chances of, because that increases their possibility of getting these diseases also. But one thing is common is there is a long history of exposure. Most of the time it is at least 8 to 10 years or longer. Some of the diseases also have 10 to 20 years of exposure and then they come up. But on an average, you can take about 8 to 10 years. And one more common factor is obviously, since you said demographics, low socioeconomic status, which again, it's self-explanatory, because these are the people from low socioeconomic status who work in these kind of industries when they get exposed. So these are, broadly, if I can give you in very simple terms, it's usually middle and older age. You can say 35, 40 onwards or something. Again, because these people start their jobs early because of low socioeconomic status, and after that 10 to 15 years of exposure, they start getting these changes, or these kind of people. And as I said, majority males. So in a nutshell, that's what I would like to say.
Thank you. Dr. Pratima, the next question for you, I have modified it a little because I was going to ask you about the engineering marvels for reducing the dust exposure in mining industry. But in your previous question, you very beautifully explained this to us. So we have an audience question from you. Dr. Dayanand from Telangana is asking you regarding the legal compensations. Is there any legislation for compensation for occupational lung disease in India, or is it limited to any one of them?
Yeah, that's definitely a difficult question. And frankly speaking, I haven't come across any regulation, or I see Dr. Animesh raising hand. Probably he can shed light here.
Okay, Animesh sir, please.
No. I'll tell you. Actually, Rajasthan has become the first state. I think 2019 October. Yes, of course, sir. So you can go ahead. You can go ahead, sir.
Yeah, government of Rajasthan has done a lot for these patients, especially silicotic patients. We do see quite a good number of patients with occupational lung disease, and the help which government is giving to these patients are basically those from the mining areas, not those who are involved in construction or any other occupations. So what we have got e-Mitra. The patient or the individual who is working in mining areas, they have to register themselves to the e-Mitra, and then from there they get an appointment for screening. If after screening their chest X-ray shows that yes, these patients might be suffering from occupational lung disease or silicosis, they are then referred to pneumoconiosis board at district level. Then the board certifies these patients. If the patient is not satisfied with the report of board, then they go to appellate board. We at medical college, I'm chairman of appellate board at my medical college. So these patients visit to us. After we have certified these patients as suffering from silicosis, then next step is they go to labor department immediately, and from the labor department, I can't say that compensation, there is some financial help from government of Rajasthan to these individuals or the family members of those who have succumbed to occupational lung disease for the purpose of rehabilitation. It is, I think at present it is 2 lakhs for those individuals who are suffering from occupational lung disease, especially silicosis, and 4 lakhs for those who have died because of silicosis. So this is a financial help for rehabilitation. We can't say that this is a compensation. Actually, the factory owners, they don't provide any compensation to these individuals.
Thank you, Neeraj sir.
Sir,
And
if I could add, yes, sir, very rightly said. And in addition, I think they also give some pension. That's what I have come across, because even now in one of our textbooks, also the new edition, which I'm also one of the authors, it's come in. So actually, I think there is, I think if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves right, 1250 or something. They were asking for more, 1250 or 1500 rupees pension if somebody passes away or something like that is there. That's also something like
pension, but it is 4 lakhs.
Yes, sir. 3 and 4 lakhs, what you said, and 2 lakhs is there for person rehabilitation. But I think pension is also there for the family, for a person with silicosis.
Great.
Thank you.
And Dr. Vijay Chennamchetty has also messaged that in Telangana, especially the Singareni Colliery, there also there is such a thing. So basically, anyone who is watching us now, if you get such a patient, it is our duty to inform them that there is actually a financial help for this from the government, because awareness is needed. If we are aware, we can make these people aware so that for the suffering, they be compensated somehow. It is definitely some help. Wonderful. Now, when I look at Dr. Neeraj currently, I really feel if Neeraj sir would have been wearing a cap and a pipe, he would be looking just like Sherlock Holmes. What happens? Often, when we are dealing with occupational lung disease, we all have to become detectives. Think about the differential diagnosis. So basically, this question is from Dr. Madhumita Kujur from Jharkhand, who has given a small clinical scenario. A farmer coming with allergic cough, wheeze, crackles, with findings on diffuse pneumonitis on X-ray, and what may be the differential diagnosis. So again, to simplify the question, Neeraj sir, please discuss the differential diagnosis you would entertain in a case of pneumoconiosis.
So differential diagnoses are always an important part of evaluation of an individual or a patient. So when it comes to differential diagnosis of occupational lung disease, we will have to differentiate among different types of occupational lung disease, and we will have to differentiate these occupational lung disease from other infectious or other malignant lung diseases. So this was a very valid question. And as far as this question is concerned, a farmer who has suffered from cough, crackles, diffuse shadows on chest X-ray without wheeze, so there may be many causes. It may be related to its occupation, or it may be unrelated to occupation. The commonest occupational disease the farmer can suffer from is hypersensitivity pneumonitis, which may be acute, subacute, or chronic, or it may be unrelated to the business of farming, and there may be some infectious cause also. There may be some viral pneumonias, there may be some atypical pneumonias like that. Or there may be exposure to some chemicals if the fertilizer has been given, fertilizer spray has been given to the farming, then these patients can develop these kind of symptoms. Another, I was going through the questions which the audience have put in. Another question was how to differentiate between silicosis and coal worker pneumoconiosis, because there may be a combined exposure of an individuals in the same industry. So it is again a very valid question. So we cannot differentiate exclusively on the basis of chest radiography that these patients suffering from silicosis or this is suffering from coal worker pneumoconiosis or from asbestosis. So we have to actually search for the history from where these patients have worked, number one, and what kind of exposure, predominant exposure has been there. For example, if we have a look on the chest radiographs of patient with silicosis and coal worker pneumoconiosis, the patient with silicosis will have more predominant axial calcification as compared to coal worker pneumoconiosis. While an area of emphysema in the chest X-ray or the CT chest will favor a diagnosis of coal worker pneumoconiosis as compared to silicosis, but none of these are pathognomonic, and we may have to go for histopathological findings, finding of silica crystals on histopathology or finding of coal crystals on histopathology will be the diagnostic part. As far as differential diagnosis from other lung diseases is concerned, it is very important that we know that what kind of occupational lung disease we are dealing with. Is it fibrotic or non-fibrotic? So fibrotic lung disease, which we commonly encounter, are silicosis, asbestosis, coal worker pneumoconiosis, and berylliosis. While non-fibrotic lung diseases are usually barytosis and byssinosis. So when we come across nodular shadows, as Dr. Soumitra has already shared with us very fine CT scan pictures, when we are dealing with nodular shadows, the common differential diagnoses are infectious disease, especially the miliary tuberculosis in our country, and there may be some miliary metastatic spread of some lung cancers. When there is septal thickening only we find on CT chest because of occupational lung disease, the important differential diagnosis would be interstitial lung disease or idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. When we do have bilateral hilar enlargement with upper lobe lung fibrosis, our first differential diagnosis would be sarcoidosis. So we will have to differentiate these occupational lung disease from common infectious, malignant, or autoimmune lung disorders. When we do have progressive massive fibrosis on CT chest, we will have to differentiate these patchy areas of fibrosis from malignancy. A scar carcinoma commonly develops in these areas, and these areas often get cavitated because of infections or even because of malignancies. When we have pleural effusions along with occupational lung disease, we will have to differentiate that these pleural effusions are not because of occupation per se, but maybe because of malignancy or because of some infections. Similarly, as I have already told, sarcoidosis and berylliosis, they share very common radiological pictures, and we'll have to differentiate between the two, which will probably be based on a definite history of exposure to beryllium. At the same time, acute occupational lung disease, for example, acute silicosis, commonly presents like a pulmonary edema-like picture on chest radiograph, and this is again very important that we do have an extensive investigation for cardiac diseases to cardiogenic pulmonary edema in these patients. Reactive airway disease syndrome will closely mimic bronchial asthma, acute severe bronchial asthma, and we'll have to again explore an history that there was an exposure to irritant, heavy dose of exposure to irritant that the patient has developed reactive airway disease.
Thank you, sir.
Occupational lung disease, just a minute, patients with occupational lung disease, they also develop some complications. For example, we do see a lot of patients with silicosis and they develop progressive systemic sclerosis. So we'll have to differentiate that this is a complication of silicosis or this is a separate disorder. Those with normal chest X-ray will mimic COPD. So we'll have to differentiate based on history of occupational exposure. That is all from my side for the differential diagnosis.
Thank you, Neeraj sir. It was looking like a press conference when a detective has solved the crime and giving us all the clues. Wonderful, really wonderful. Okay, Dr. Pratik had to leave us in the middle because actually he was ill and today he had taken 2 injections before sitting in the panel, but unfortunately he could not continue. Dr. Narendra sir, we have raked up such a horrible picture of pneumoconiosis that everyone is getting scared that is this treatable or is this something very dangerous? Narendra sir, please guide us about the drugs which you use in a stable case of pneumoconiosis.
That's very good. We have few drugs in the pipeline and already using for so many patients. They are the calcium channel blockers, tetrahydrin and N-acetylcysteine. These we know the tetrahydrin, a calcium channel blocker, which acts by reducing the deposition of type 1, type 3 collagen in the lung tissues. N-acetylcysteine, we know that it acts by the different mechanisms. When these 2 drugs in combination have a beauty that in a silicosis, they can reduce the symptoms like cough and chest tightness and improves the lung function. These 2 combination. And another drug is the aluminum compounds, which can be used for the reducing the crystal deposition of silica in the lung, so that we can have a lesser degree of exposure. And the other drugs we have is polyvinyl pyridine N-oxide, PVNOs, which are mainly used for the silica-induced fibrosis. And another drug which used for the systemic autoimmune response to the asbestosis is the canakinumab, which is the interleukin-1 beta antibody, which can use to reduce the systemic autoimmune disease associated with the asbestosis. These are the few drugs which can use for the mainly for the silicosis and asbestosis. Thank you.
Thank you, Narendra sir. Soumitra sir.
Hi.
You deal with end-stage lung disease, lung transplantation, ECMO. Please tell us about the criteria in a case of pneumoconiosis for listing for lung transplant. And secondly, a question by Dr. Vijay Chennamchetty, that when you deal with other cases of lung transplant and when you're dealing with an occupational lung disease going to a lung transplant, any stark difference between the 2?
And the issue is, as per the current guideline by ISHLT, which is very simple, and being a pulmonologist, I think we should all go through those ISHLT guideline. But just to tell you the fact, there is nothing different for specifically has come out for occupational lung disease related end-stage lung disease. Because it's very rare actually to do lung disease, though it's we are discussing, but it's very rare because after the government in every country has become very, very stringent about the exposures, it's really rare. So the time of listing is as per the standard ILD or in the COPD, because there will be associated COPD changes also in either of this colorectal pneumoconiosis or in silicosis. We mostly see silicosis, which actually, because the changes, the end-stage lung disease happens somewhere around 10 years after. For asbestos, it takes about 40 to 50 years or maybe more than that. So by the time the patient will be 70 or 80 years age, and by that they will be, by age-wise, they will be cut off from the lung transplant kind of scenarios. So ILD, just to remind you, for ILD, what is the time for listing? The ILD IPF kind of thing, where you should consider thinking of a lung transplant service related referral as soon as you diagnose, because somewhere around give and take 3 years is the lifespan almost for all these patients. So the time of listing is a decline in the FVC of more than 10% during the last 6 months, or if it is a case of a DLCO you are taking, so more than 15% decline over the last 6 months, or if there is a desaturation which is happening up to 88%, or the 6-minute walk distance is less than 250 meters, or the 6-minute walk distance has fallen by more than 50 meters over a 6 months period. And there is significant pulmonary hypertension by right heart catheterization. And if there is, say, a respiratory acute emergency and leading to pneumothorax or acute exacerbation leading to ICU admission. So these are the features where you should list the patient for transplant. But these are all numbers, but basically a physician or a pulmonologist who is handling the patient, his or her own thinking how the patient is doing is the most important thing. For COPD, just let me tell you again what is the time for listing. It's again, if the board index is more than 7, board index, it comes from BMI, FEV1, 6-minute walk distance, and MMRC. If the board index is more than 7, or the FEV1 again is here less than 15%, or maybe less than 20%, more than 3 exacerbation during the last year, 1 severe hypercapnic exacerbation leading to ICU admission. So these are some thinking where you should think of taking the patient for listing. And after listing, somewhere around 1 to 2 months is the time period now we are facing for a patient to get the lungs. So the question now is there any difference between those type of patients and with the industrial exposed patients like silicosis? There are many papers about that. And most of the papers says that non-silicotic patients who are in end-stage lung diseases are actually do much worse. The reason behind is possibly associated comorbidities, maybe associated diabetes and other comorbid conditions of the patient. But for silicotic lung diseases, they said it is actually better than the associated ILD or better than associated COPD. You may be knowing that ILD or IPF, basically what I'm talking of, IPF and COPD, the outcome, if you are talking of outcome median survival, 7 years survival, is actually lowest for both IPF and for COPD. If it is a pulmonary hypertension, they have got a better outcome. If it is a CF, they have got a much better outcome. So their outcome for median survival at 7 years is about 70%, whereas COPD and IPF will be somewhere around 55 to 60%. So there is a wide gap is there. So again, to make it short, if it is a non-silicotic disease, they will be having worse outcome than the standard ILD COPD outcomes. If it is a silicotic, their outcome will be better than those.
Okay, thank you. Before I move on to the next question, I just got a message from our founder trustee, Dr. N.H. Krishna sir, and he just now informed me that we have actually crossed over 1200 logins live. Wow. That's a great number when we are talking about occupational lung disease. Great job, team. Okay, Dr. Animesh Ji, vaccines are magic bullets. Vaccines just change the natural history of a disease. Would you want to comment regarding the various vaccines given to people working in occupations notable for occupational lung disease? So someone has joined a job which is known to have occupational lung disease. Any special vaccination advice for these people?
Thank you. A little difficult, but yeah, interesting question. To my mind, I don't think any specific vaccination, maybe other panelists can chip in, but what I can think of to an extent, maybe pneumococcal vaccine may help because it may be helpful in certain diseases, maybe also in asthma to an extent. And of course, BCG is given to children, so that is one of the things which should be there. Probably that could be. But other than that, any specific vaccines, at least I can't think of. Maybe other panelists can chip in.
Neeraj sir, please. Neeraj sir.
So rightly said, pneumococcal vaccination is specifically indicated for those who are involved in welding work, because welders, they are more prone to develop bacterial pneumonias, and pneumococcal vaccine is definitely going to help them.
Dr. Soumitra, you wanted to say something here.
Yeah, other than the pneumococcal vaccine, the yearly influenza vaccine is definitely important disease vaccinations for end-stage lung disease.
Thank you. Okay. So our message to the audience is that nothing specific, but pneumococcus, yes. Now, many of us over here are leading certain organizations. It may be a hospital, it may be a voluntary organization. And often we are at a surprise that if we want to organize an awareness program with respect to occupational lung disease, which organization should we collaborate with? Now, since Dr. Pratima, your work involves working with all these organizations with respect to air pollution, occupational lung disease, please tell our panel and the audience the names of certain organizations, both government and non-government, whom we should approach if we want to adopt a program with more impact in certain these areas.
First of all, Dr. Atri, I would really like to thank you for such a decision, a step that you as a community want to take. And that is something which is missing in the country. We have seen Dr. Arvind from Lung Care Foundation, who has been voicing his concerns towards the air pollution impact on human health and the lungs. And today, when I saw the picture shared by Dr. Soumitra, I was taken back to the pictures that Dr. Arvind keeps sharing. So we as an organization, not-for-profit organization who are working with the government, with various stakeholders, academicians, other citizens, scientists, who are not much aware of the medical terms, medical impacts of the air pollutants on human health, it would be good to reach out to such organizations. So like we do a lot of capacity building and awareness workshops. Then there is another organization in Delhi, CSE. Then ASAR is another organization who does a lot of awareness programs in the country. There is Vatavaran. So all these not-for-profit organization, because there's nothing for them to, practically benefit out of it, but to create awareness for the society and ensure that environment and human health both, they are in a better quality. Yeah.
Thank you. And we shall definitely reach out to these organizations when we are able to do some campaign regarding the same. Okay. Dr. Neeraj sir. Now, this patient has damaged lungs due to occupational lung disease. Can you tell us about the common infections you would see in this patient who already has damaged lung due to occupational lung disease?
Yes. So when we talk of infections in damaged lung because of occupational lung disease, the basic pathology we see is that the macrophage function is affected. Because whenever dust is there in the alveoli, the macrophages, they ingest these dust particles and they become inactive against infection which occurs inside the lung. So the most common infection we see is tuberculosis in patients with pneumoconiosis, especially silicosis. Almost 25% of the patients with silicosis, they suffer from tuberculosis also, which is called silicotuberculosis. The tuberculosis in these patients is usually a more severe form of disease, less responsive to treatment, or longer duration of treatment is required, and these patients are going to get more complications as compared to those who are not exposed to dust particles or the silica. So tuberculosis is number one infectious complications of occupational lung diseases. At the same time, we do have some cases of atypical mycobacteria also, which can super infect these lungs which are already damaged by occupational lung diseases. Fungal infection can also occur because there are some areas of cavitation in progressive massive fibrosis, and these are the areas where the fungus can seed in and can result in aspergillomas, and even invasive fungal infection can also develop in these areas. Some kind of viral infection or bacterial infection can also be there because of compromised immunity, especially those patients who are suffering from occupational lung disease and are immunocompromised because of either corticosteroid therapy or because of diabetes. They are also more prone to develop bacterial infection. So these are all infections which can develop in a patient who has already got damaged lung because of occupational lung disease. Not only this, those individuals who are exposed to animals directly in their occupations, which is called zoonosis, they can also develop some kind of infection in the lung, apart from other kind of lung disease like hypersensitivity pneumonitis or like that. So especially the chlamydia infection is more a common zoonosis which can be seen in patients with occupational lung disease. And at last, we are all going through an pandemic of COVID. So I will say that for all of us who are healthcare workers, may it be doctors, nursing staff, or paramedical staff, whatever we are serving in the hospitals, we are also at risk of contracting this viral infection. And I will also call this an opportunistic or the occupation related infection in the lungs.
Thank you, Neeraj sir. And our next question to Dr. Narendra sir. Well, this patient was a student of WhatsApp University, and after his or her classes at WhatsApp University, the person came and told me that, see, doctor, I think I am suffering from occupational lung disease. Can you please tell me what are the various cancers I can suffer? So, Narendra sir, please tell us about various malignancies rising from occupational lung disease and some common signs and symptoms alerting us to the possibility of a malignancy in such a patient.
Yeah, we can have a different malignancies, mesothelioma, bronchogenic carcinoma, different varieties of bronchogenic carcinoma can occur with any of the pneumoconiosis. When it comes to the symptoms and signs of patient with pneumoconiosis who's suspecting malignancy are similar to those of the high-risk patients with the cancer screening program. Those are the increase in cough and increase in chest pain, appearance of the dyspnea and hemoptysis, recurrent bouts of pneumonia, and localized wheeze, clubbing, and rib erosions, shoulder arm pain, and which it can have a suspicion that a present patient which is on pneumoconiosis going into the malignancies. Any variety of malignancy can occur with the any type of the pneumoconiosis. Thank you.
Okay. Now, Dr. Soumitro, being this transplant physician, you actually have to do a lot of interventions, endobronchial or transthoracic. So we have Dr. Tarun Tiwari from Ajmer, who is basically asking that what is the fate of pleural plaque in occupational lung disease? And another thing, suppose you have a transplant patient or a patient evaluation for transplant or of occupational lung disease, how to go about silicotuberculosis in such a patient? And tell us about the general intervention role in such cases.
Okay, good question. Difficult. Each patient, you have to take your decisions separately because those patients at the very beginning stage where you really need to diagnose, I believe if you have taken a careful setting of the history, where from the patient is coming, what kind of exposure he had, and the X-ray and the CT scan will 99% will give you that primary diagnosis of the occupational lung disease. If you are really in a much doubt, you have to do a confirmatory diagnosis to take a biopsy, then perhaps a bronchoscopic or transbronchial lung biopsy, either with a forceps biopsy with the help of fluoroscopy. Here I must insist that please use the fluoroscope because there is already associated some fibrotic cicatrization fibrosis and there will be some emphysematous changes near to the pleura. So be careful about that. So a fluoroscope will be helpful. Or you might think of a cryobiopsy, which is a very good tool. Or you can do a thoracoscopic lung biopsy if you think you would go that way. So this is for primary detection kind of a thing. Now the question comes, this other problem, associated problem of TB or associated malignancy, or if it is a case of a pleural malignancy where you need to do a biopsy. Pleural biopsy, very well, go ahead with the thoracoscopic biopsy of the pleura. and target towards the lower end. Not every place of the pleura might be giving you a good specimen. Target the diaphragmatic recess, basically, where you will be getting the maximum malignant cells. And the other is standard sample. All cases, as we do bronchoscopy and lavage, we will get more lymphocytes if you go for the cells. And you can do a microbiological exam, NTB gene expert, and other fungal diseases. And sometimes if you have to think of a PET positive, you have a very good, very big thinking about malignancy associated, do a PET and a PET positive node. You can go for with EBUS, mediastinal node biopsy, for diagnosing and staging the malignancy.
Thank you, Dr. Soumitra. And in community medicine, when we used to learn those MCQs, there was something primary prevention, primordial prevention, and another thing which we as clinicians miss a lot is health education. So Animesh ji, can you tell us some preventive health measures which can be employed by populations in areas adjacent to such mines or factories?
Thank you, Dr. Atri. See, this very, very important. But I think few things which can be done. See, certain things we cannot do, but one of the few things which can be done are simple things. What people could do is obviously try and avoid exposure to the maximum. That's the simplest, but it's easier said than done, obviously. So what can be done is they can try and prevent the exposure or the duration of exposure. So people, since you very specifically asked that people who are adjacent to such areas, so one would be that they can try and use, protective devices, even a simple mask, or if possible, like, if they can close those, say, windows or doors at the time of when there is a lot of, say, smoke emanating or the dust emanating, the time of working hours, or they could screen, and then that would be one of the things. The other thing is try and, use things which can, like we say, wet it. Okay, so wet means using water. So water would be, something which can make the dust settled, and again, the exposure decreases. They've also said that, in industries itself, if they have to wet, that would be good, or sometimes even oil can be used and all. But here, at least in the vicinity, if they are staying, they can use that. Another very important measure would be people should be aware, because many times it starts with that, you said that, health education. So awareness. So it starts with health education, awareness, and that's how first step would be. The people have to be aware that this is something which they have to be wary about. This can lead to issues or problems. And then next would be they will be taking steps for that. And one very important thing which I've said earlier, which can expose people to more and more harm, is smoking. So smoking, cut down on smoking, passive smoking, as well as even indoor air pollution. I think some of my panelists, co-panelists have referred to this. I think Dr. Pratima referred, even I think one of the other panelists referred to. So even that indoor smoke, they can cut down on that, because that is an additive effect. What we say is, synergistic and additive effect. So that also needs to be done. So these are some of the simple measures that they can, and this is what, at least in the areas adjacent, they can try and do, so that they can minimize their exposure. And one more important thing I would say is periodic checkups. And that should include a lung function, which can be, even a basic spirometry or what. But this is something probably, at least I'll say, if not at least annually. So that has to be done. That would be something which is. And I would like to bring in another aspect which probably many people would not think of. Take some kind of a health insurance, because that, otherwise also we don't take as Indians, and definitely that would be a good idea. And I think even now the government has some schemes which are very, very, even the Pradhan Mantri Yojana is there, so that can be taken up. So these are some of the things which people can actually think of to maybe reduce their exposure and try to minimize the effects, if at all they were to happen.
I think that's a great message, that encourage your people to take health insurance before they fall ill. We should all stress on that point. Great point. Okay. we can all realize that civilization and occupational lung disease and pollution is going side by side. But since Dr. Pratima, you are an environmental engineer, environmental scientist, can you tell us about some renewable sources of energy and their feasibility to replace the current existing mines and factories?
Yeah, that's a brilliant option that the country should be looking at, using renewable energy. And there are a lot of initiatives that have already been taken by various industries, and government is trying to provide incentives also to use solar energy, wind energy. So these industries, they have started using rooftop solar energy to replace the conventional form of energy. So we can see that a lot of these commercial industries, they use DG sets to run while there's a power cut. And then also to replace diesel with CNG is also a good option that can be explored by the various industries. So while talking to these fuel giants like IOCL and GAIL and everyone, so we were trying to understand what is the kind of mix, a hybrid approach these industries can adopt going in future, so that we can, I mean, yes, cutting down coal completely is not possible, practically is not feasible, and it might not happen in next 15 or 20 years, but slowly and gradually we will have to move towards the kind of fuel we are talking about, hydrogen and everything. But for that, industrial body needs to come together, and they need to start investing in such initiatives towards cleaner technology and fuel. Yeah.
I just now realized that this webinar which we are doing, actually we are promoting to the environment, because myself and Dr. Pratima, we have done webinars together, we have done seminars together. And our doing a seminar together mean both of us taking an aeroplane and then a taxi cab to reach a venue. But here we are without any aeroplane, without any taxi cab, from our home giving this webinar. So I am sure we can work on such thing in our industry also. So Neeraj sir, we all know about your ICU at Ajmer, and it's a legend that if anyone needs an ICU, then Dr. Neeraj sir ICU, respiratory ICU, is probably the best in that part of the state. So Neeraj sir, suppose this pneumoconiosis patient got admitted with an acute worsening respiratory failure, how would you guide us regarding the ventilation strategies, both non-invasive and invasive?
So when a patient with pneumoconiosis lands up in acute respiratory failure, first of all, we will have to look for the cause of acute respiratory failure. In my experience, most of these patients, if they land up in acute respiratory failure, the cause is usually a complication which is in the form of either right heart failure or a pneumothorax or a secondary infection leading to septicemia. So first of all, we'll have to look for the cause of acute respiratory failure in these patients who are already respiratory compromised. So once these causes are ruled out, or these causes have been taken care of adequately by adequate antibiotic therapy or intercostal drainage or decongestive therapy in case of right heart failure, then even if they don't improve with this treatment, we will have to go for positive pressure support. So this may be either in the form of NIV or in the form of ventilatory management. We know that the lungs have been destroyed badly by occupational lung disease in all these patients, and the damage is irreversible. So mechanical ventilation or non-invasive ventilation are not going to help very much in these patients. But yes, for time being, we can help these patients with the help of NIV or mechanical ventilation. And this is to be applied only when we find a treatable cause of acute respiratory failure. If there is not non-treatable cause of acute respiratory failure, these patients are not going to be benefited from any kind of mechanical ventilation.
Thank you, Neeraj sir. We all understand that acute respiratory failure is a tough topic and the outcome is not always predictable. But still, this should be a guideline for all of us that this is what we should do, this is what we should not do with respect to these patients. Now, my next question to Narendra sir, you have already answered part of it in your previous question regarding the chelation therapy in occupational lung disease. Now, what I want to ask you is, any role of long-term antibiotic therapy in occupational lung disease?
As such, to my knowledge, that I did not come across any long-term antibiotic usages in the pneumoconiosis. What I know is that the common organisms which we encounter within the pneumoconiosis patients are atypical mycobacteria, and meropenem resistant gram-negative organism. So any antibiotics which can cover these organisms in the long-term basis can be useful, like clarithromycins and meropenems, and then can be useful in the long-term antibiotic usage in the pneumoconiosis. So any other panelist can take up this question, long-term antibiotic usage in the pneumoconiosis.
Yeah.
Okay, Soumitra sir.
What we have learned from our experience and also from the experience of South Africa, where the maximum connective tissue, maximum cold workers pneumoconiosis and silicosis is seen, is that perhaps azithromycin 250 milligram once a day for 7 days for every month for 6 months, and then give some days gap and then restart it, perhaps will help you to get secondary infections and long-term morbidity and mortality. But be very careful about the ER problems, which sometimes we tend to forget about azithromycins.
Neeraj sir.
Yeah, exactly. The azithromycin has already been in use for patients with COPD as an anti-inflammatory drug, where the regimen is 250 milligram twice a week for almost 6 months to 12 months. So at the same guidelines, we can also give azithromycin to these patients to prevent from secondary infections, and it may act as an anti-inflammatory agent too, and may reduce further fibrogenesis process in the lungs.
Yeah, being the moderator, I would take the liberty of adding my own experience over here. What I would want to say to people is macrolide immunomodulator damaged lung is a wonderful combination. It may be bronchiectasis, it may be COPD, it may be severe asthma, or it may be occupational lung disease. Go with this macrolide option. Wonderful. Many times what the culture depicts may not be there, means in vivo may not necessarily reciprocate in vitro. So long-term carbapenem, long-term meropenem would be a strict no. Try to move away from meropenem after that 2 weeks, because long-term carbapenem would have certain horrible community implications. Okay, now Soumitra sir, please give us some insights on the successful role of lung transplant or heart-lung transplant in occupational lung disease case, and what would you want to comment about the role of PET CT scan prior to the transplant with respect to suspicious nodes or suspicious changes?
Your last bit I have already covered. I think when I talked about the PET CT positive thing, we must consider to have an EBUS bronchoscopy and lymph node biopsy from mediastinum. Let's talk about the transplant part. First of all, though I work for lung transplant, it's never a fantastic option. It's I would say the last option in an irreversible end-stage lung disease where nothing else is there. About the transplant, one of my very good friend is always say our solid organ transplant has started in India much earlier than Western countries, when Lord Ganesha has received the elephant's head after he has accidentally decapitized. So yeah, a long time ago. But then in current times, the first transplant has happened in, again, Canada, Toronto, somewhere around 1963, the first successful single lung transplant. India, we started somewhere around 85, a long gap. In all other lung transplant, solid organ transplant, India is as good as, or maybe sometimes better than, the Western countries. We are still somewhat lacking from Western countries as far as the results are concerned. But post-transplant survival is getting better over the last decade or so, primarily due to the consequence of a better surgical approach, surgical technique, improved post-operative intensive care, better infrastructure, better understanding of the disease process by the pulmonologist, who tries to refer now at the earliest than previously. And obviously our knowledge is gaining over time. So yes, lung transplant has got a role, but only in an end-stage lung disease where nothing can be done. We have already talked about what are the parameters when you must consider listing. So yeah, that's it. About heart lung, you touched upon heart lung. The most importantly, if there is an advanced cardiac and lung disease which is not amenable to either isolated heart or lung transplant, then only the patient is a candidate for a combined heart-lung transplant, but which hardly is necessary. And again, heart-lung transplant outcome is worse than only lung transplant. Only if there is a significant, very significant pulmonary arterial hypertension, and if the transpulmonary pressure gradient is more than 16 to 20, that means on right heart catheter, if your RV pressure is more than 16, then only you will be thinking that the pressure gradient is high. Then only you can think of a both heart and lung transplant. But mostly, even if there is a high PS pressure of around 60 or 70 even, we try to do only a lung transplant, a single isolated bilateral lung transplant, and patient really improves.
Thank you, Dr. Soumitra. I would want to quote here a famous doctor of Indian origin, Dr. Atul C. Mehta, had actually quoted this reference to Lord Ganesha when he was ACCP president at the Cleveland Clinic. And this is now famously quoted by researchers on lung transplant worldwide. I shall very quickly go through the questions and feedback received from our Janta Janardan, because without our Janta Janardan, we are nothing. We have received a comment from Dr. Vivek Chandra Rao Sripalli from Telangana, who is telling that occupational lung disease are actually notifiable disease, which are covered by the Workman Compensation Act, and compensation is paid upon loss of earning capacity. He also tells us that all occupational lung disease, if they are dose dependent, they are actually preventable by proper engineering controls, and it is the responsibility of the industry to keep the emissions less than permissible level. Now, and for this, we need to approach the ESI or director of factories to educate employees and employers. Okay, we have one question from Uttar Pradesh, Ghaziabad, Dr. Dinesh Kumar Saraswat. Dr. Dinesh is asking this question to Narendra sir. Does coal reduce the injurious effect of silica, as coal is a chemically inert substance? Narendra sir not there. Neeraj sir, you would want to answer? Does coal
actually, I don't think that exposure to coal will prevent anybody from suffering from silicosis or silica. Although there may be a simultaneous exposure to both the dust, but the mechanism is same, that there is involvement of macrophages, and this is going to reduce the immunity of the lungs, and there will be definitely an area of damage and fibrosis. So I don't think that exposure to coal is going to save an individual from silicosis.
Okay. One question from Dr. Neetu from Kerala, again to Narendra sir. Narendra sir has a lot of fans. I have noticed this before also. And Narendra sir, could you once again tell us about the role of acetylcysteine, N-acetylcysteine, in this occupational lung disease?
The N-acetylcysteine is a wonderful molecule in all diseases of the lung, taking from minor upper respiratory tract infection to the ILDs. The N-acetylcysteine is a drug of choice in stable pneumoconiosis, where it acts on the reactive oxygen species and and those inhibiting the apoptosis of mitochondria and elevating the severity of pulmonary fibrosis. When in combination with N-acetylcysteine with calcium channel blockers like tetraendrin, we can gives the symptomatic relief from the silicosis problems from cough, chest tightness, and even it can improve the respiratory function. So N-acetylcysteine, I can say it is more used than the paracetamol by the chest physicians. It's a wonderful molecule from taking from the upper respiratory tract infection to the ILD. Somewhere in that mechanism, it links and it acts on the system. So this N-acetylcysteine is a wonderful molecule. It is my favorite molecule of the practice.
Wonderful. Soumitra sir, add to it.
Here I would beg to differ. My thinking is as per the findings, as per all the papers. Let's talk about COPD. Gold guideline has said NAC has got no role. Let's talk about ILD. Triple therapy part of NAC, NAC part of triple therapy has been debunked. The idea has been debunked. There is no role. Other cases, I really don't know. Yes, NAC has been referred by pulmonologists years together, but I'm having reservations.
Neeraj sir, please.
Yeah, probably NAC is an antioxidant, we know. So its role actually will be in acute exposures when there is initiation of inflammation, when there is oxidative damage. Once the damage has been set in, once there is fibrosis, I don't think NAC is going to help these patients only apart from liquefying the secretions and helping in expectorating out the secretions. So if there is acute exposures to any infection or occupational irritants, the NAC may be helpful, but in chronic diseases, it may not be of any help.
Thank you. Now we would want to close. Before closing, one last word from our eminent panelist, Dr. Pratima. Any roadblocks you face in transmitting your message regarding the environment to practicing doctors, which you would want to address from our CCI platform, because you have 1200 plus pan-India live doctors watching you now.
Thank you, Dr. Atri. I was actually thinking about the same because there are a lot of jargons here. And being not from a medical background, yes, because I have been studying the air pollution problem, so I can understand the terminology that is being used. But consider a layman, a citizen who does not even understand any of these. How will he understand or she understand what impact these pollutants are going to cause, or how are our lungs going to be impacted? So if the doctors community is planning for any awareness program or to communicate the message, it would be really helpful if we can de-jargonize the terms and make the layman understand what impact it will create. That would be really helpful in creating the awareness, and also probably because our stakeholders, that is the policy makers, they don't have any understanding of the impact, what it is causing. So it will be, rather than creating awareness among the masses, I would appreciate if you could plan a session for our policymakers, and that would be the first start that would help the country, and it could be part of the National Clean Air Program as well. That is what I would want to say. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, to all our doctors over here, a one-liner from you summing up today and the message. Dr. Animesh Jain, Community Medicine.
The standard line, prevention is better than cure, and especially more so in this, I think. So I think we need to remember that.
Dr. Neeraj sir from the desert.
Yeah. So we see a lot of patients of pneumoconiosis. What I think is that CCI must take an initiative and contact National Medical Commission to start a diploma course in occupational lung disease and rehabilitation. I think this will help those individuals who are working in these dirty environments. They will have a specialist to take care of them.
Dr. Narendra sir from the heart of India, Hyderabad.
We should improve preventive engineering techniques for a pneumoconiosis, which we concentrate on that to prevent the pneumoconiosis.
Dr. Soumitra sir from the end stage lung disease, transplantation point of view.
My one-liner should be, we should overcome whatever way we are slightly behind the world here in lung transplant field. And the future is definitely bright, and the future is calling us. Towards that end, I would just want to say MGM Hospital has started a fellowship on lung transplant, and anybody who is willing, please come over. Thank you.
Okay. I take the liberty of the last word. I come from Jharkhand, the state with the largest number of mines and factories in a small space. All of these have a dispensary and a medical officer, MBBS. We need to give these medical officers a training in occupational lung disease in the lines of what Dr. Neeraj sir told. That is the need of the hour. So with this, we would want to thank our webinar coordinator, Dr. Vijay Kumar Chennam Chetty, our National Secretary, Dr. Ravi Dosi, our two founder patrons, Dr. N.H. Krishna and Dr. Narayana Pradeep, our academic partners, Cipla Respiratory, and everyone over there behind the scenes for the flawless technical things, and all the panelists out here. You're all super busy people. You took out your time for the environment. You took out your time for something less covered, occupational lung disease. So with this at CCI, it's a good night to all of you. Have a nice time. Stay safe till we meet again.
Good night.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you, everyone.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you.